Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Backyard Banter Podcast. Twice a week, talking to some of the best minds in the football writing industry, talking about how they got to where they are and how we can help you, the audience, get there too, or just listen to some good stories. And I have a really good one on tap today, and we're speaking to somebody who is probably, I think, second only to Charlie in name drops on the podcast so far, and that is my NFL media colleague / roommate, Alex Gelhar. Alex, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing name drops on this podcast, but I have been mentioned quite a few times, naturally, because we live and work together and spend altogether too much time together. So happy to be here, man. I'm sad it took 21 episodes, but better late than never, right?
Well, listen, I mean, obviously, I think it's better now that you and I, to peel back the curtain here a little bit, we are now on other ends of the country. You are actually back home in Wisconsin. I'm back home in Virginia. So if you're watching the show, this is not my childhood room. I'm broadcasting from my mother's office, and these cute background colors, they don't belong to me. But anyways, yeah, you and I are no longer in the same vicinity, which I think could have been kind of weird, podcasting from the same home.
Hugging each other around that mic would have been a little awkward. So I had to tease you a little bit there, but it makes sense to do this while we're both spaced out a little more.
Absolutely. I would say so. And, I get to say so because this is my podcast after all. Anyways, Alex, so you obviously work at NFL.com, but I always start the podcast asking the guest how you fell in love with football or fantasy sports in general. So take us through your backstory there.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm back home in Wisconsin. I'm in my parents' condo now. And if you know anything about Wisconsin, football is huge here because of the Green Bay Packers. So for the most part, if you're a kid who's born in Wisconsin, you're born bleeding green and gold. And I got that from my dad. So as a kid, Sundays would grow up, would get out of church, get home, watch the Packers, watch football all day. Usually in the afternoons, we'd get together with kids in the neighborhood and we'd play football during the afternoon game because the Packers would be at 12 o'clock, and then it'd come home, it'd be like dinner, watch NFL primetime, watch Sunday Night Football, and then that was all we had all year round, basically. As soon as football took over, was 24/7 in the house. Kids at school, we'd play football at recess, stretch games out from we'd have 3 recesses in elementary school, stretch football out the game would continue through all 3 recesses and stuff, and just grew up watching the game and loving it and wanting to learn more about it. And then my dad has been playing fantasy football since the 90s, so pre-internet, when he used to have to get the paper on Monday morning and hand tabulate fantasy scores, print out 10 copies of it and mail it to all the guys in the league so people knew where their standings were at. So when I was a kid, I loved football, and he'd bring me to the fantasy drafts because we always do a live draft, which I recommend everybody do as well. And I would just be the beer runner when I was a kid. So I would sit by my dad on the cooler, and when somebody in the league finished the beer, they'd be like, "Alex, I need one," and I'd run it over. So for years, I just hung out at the drafts with my dad and would watch fantasy football. And then when I was a little older, he'd allow me to make a pick here or there, 9th round pick. He'd point to 3 guys and be like, "Who should we take out of these 3?" And I collected football cards and played Madden and stuff. So I'd be like, "Oh, let's take this guy," or whatever. And then when I was about 12 years old or so, somebody dropped out of the league, and I had enough money to buy into the league. And I was like, "Dad, I want to be in the league. Let me in." So they were like, "Yeah, that'll work." So I've been in that league ever since. And that's got my dad, 2 uncles now, my godfather, some firefighters that my dad has worked with forever that I've known for my entire life. A couple of my friends have joined the league, one of whom is also a firefighter with my dad now. So that was kind of where it all started. And it was just, grew up around the sport, grew up loving the sport, played it for a while. As you know, I don't exactly have the frame to continue
what are you
football very, very far. I'm a shorter, lean guy, so I would have had to be a Wes Welker type. But no, so I always grew up loving it and loved watching it, and that was where the sickness came in.
Well, it's true. You're definitely the less sexy physical fit one in the apartment. That's obviously for sure. But no, I mean, it's definitely true. You grow up in that Midwest Wisconsin culture. You are inundated with football. It is in every layer of the society there. That's for sure. So I know that you did not necessarily jump right into writing about sports right after college. What were you doing before then?
Well, right after college, I went to school. Sports was always still a huge passion. And I went to school at Marquette in Milwaukee for basically like a TV and film degree. So did a lot of college television production, did a lot of video production on my own. So worked on some of the sports shows and did some sports related things. Like my buddy and I filmed a Olympians dinner with a lot of speed skating champions, because Milwaukee was like a mecca for the U.S. speed skating team back in the day. So did stuff like that. But my main focus getting out of school was to work in entertainment, which was what brought me to Los Angeles. I moved out to work in TV and film, and I had started doing that as an assistant at a small independent production company the first about a year and a half that I was out there, because that was what I focused on more in school and spent more time on than anything sports related. I mean, it was always a big passion, like I said, but was writing and watching film and TV and stuff like that. So I came out, was successful in that, but then the opportunity to work up for the NFL came as I was kind of in a transition looking for my next job in entertainment. And I was like, I've loved football my entire life. It'd be a dummy not to apply. And that's what got me to the NFL.
And your first job was not with the fantasy team. You were originally doing what now?
Correct. I joined in digital features, which was more of a seamless transition from TV and film, because I worked with our old boss, Carmen Dukes, who I think you might have mentioned once or twice on this podcast, who was awesome. But she had just gotten hired to start out digital features, which was kind of nebulous when I got there. They were like, we don't know what this is going to be, but we're open to everything. So it was a lot of just writing articles, like whatever we have an idea for. And I was doing a lot of shooting and editing video as well, because I was kind of like a jack of all trades under that team. So like, what if they needed somebody to shoot a video with, like, Des Bryant was in the office and they were like, hey, let's get some sort of behind the scenes video. Like, that would be me. I'd go and shoot it and I'd come back and edit it, get it on the website and do that thing. Or like, hey, we're writing X, Y, or Z. Like, Alex, we need you to chip in on that. Like, we did a big, when it was the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination, that actually had a big impact on the NFL world as well, because it happened in Dallas, and Dallas was kind of a fledgling franchise at the time, and all these things that happened with it. So we did this big joint feature with films and the network features team, the digital features team. So stuff like that, working on those pages and writing and editing and researching and stuff like that too. But as a part of that, like, as you know, you're on the 7-month swing right now for the NFL. I was as well. Fantasy was under Carmen's domain, but it was mostly just Michael Fabiano, Marcus Grant, and Adam Rank were kind of the main trio there, and they had a lot of duties with the network and stuff like that. So I saw that there was a need for maybe them to help, and I had played fantasy my whole life, so as a way to show my versatility at first, I was like, hey, do you guys need help chipping in? So like the first year I was there, I started out writing like defense profiles for the draft kit, which really exciting stuff.
But a real treat.
Real treat. So I started just dabbling in a little bit. Like I did some stuff for them my first tour of duty, and then I went on my break, and I came back for actually I came back full time because I was fortunate enough for a head to open up. But I was still full time in digital features with Carmen and Amar Shah, who works under her as well. So I was doing everything with digital features, but there was still more and more opportunities as like Marcus and Rank were on television more with Fabiano too. Like the fantasy team needed more and more help. So I kept chipping in and took some initiative too, like created some of my own articles and like pitched them to them. I didn't just like create it and publish it at first when I wasn't in the teams, but I was like, hey guys, this was an idea I had. The first one I wrote like that was a fantasy film study, because nobody was really doing that on NFL.com at the time. It was, our editorial like slate was a little more trim, and it was like Fabiano would get a stardom and send them out. We did waiver wire. Marks would do an article or two, and that was sponsored, and that was kind of it. So I was like looking for opportunities in the space that could fit with what I liked and what I wanted to do. And then as I just kept working my way in, I saw fantasy was growing and growing and growing, as you know, and it was a bigger opportunity. So I just kind of pushed my way in there. And it was like, I think Herman and others agreed and put me over there, and that's where I've been ever since.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really good lessons there from your story in terms of how you got in. One being that you saw a need and then just didn't wait to be asked to do it. You just kind of did it. And I think that's something that a lot of people have talked about is a really important part of getting into this business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially this business, but in any job, like any opportunity, whether it's your school or an internship or a job, it's all going to be what you make of it. Few people are lucky enough to just go somewhere and have everything handed to them, on a silver platter. That really doesn't happen. Like if you see opportunities, you have to be able to take the initiative and take those and be prepared to take those opportunities and not just kind of rest on your laurels and say like, oh, well, they'll recognize me when they're ready. Like those people, other people at whatever job or situation it is, are all going to be extremely busy too. And they might not have the time or always be thinking about, when is it right? Should we put this person in something else? Or like, should we give this opportunity to somebody else? You have to be there like asking for it. And most of the stuff that's happened to me throughout my entire career, college, entertainment industry here has been a lot of me recognizing opportunity and taking the initiative for it.
Yeah, you're definitely a headstrong person, which is good because our team needs that a lot of times. And I'm certainly not that person as much as I, as much as I seem like, I mean, I know what I want and I do what I want, but like at the same time, this is actually kind of fun. Let's talk about this a little bit because I think it comes a lot from your background in entertainment and just like your personality in general. There's a lot of politicking that goes on with what you do. And it's something that I've said a lot in our private discussions. It's something I could care less about, even though I know it's important. I don't think it jives with my personality or anything. Why is that so important? And how do you implement that on a daily basis at our job?
Yeah. Well, I guess to back up a little bit too is like then since I slid into being full-time at fantasy with the television and other commitments of guys like, I mean, Fabiano, as you know, is like on every show now. So he doesn't write for us as much anymore and things like that. I kind of fell into and took on a bigger leadership role with our team then and, helped bring in you. And I was there when we brought in franchise Matt Franciscovich and just, I guess it comes from, I mean, I did have to do a lot of that politicking, like you said, in entertainment industry. I always like to joke that that's what I miss the most about it is when you're an assistant, it's kind of like Game of Thrones and it's this exchange and battle for information on what script do you have or what screener can we get or what is this person doing next and are they available and like what do you need from me to get this information. But also just I think it's good in any sense, and it's not for everybody, like you said, not everybody has this mentality with it, but getting a sense of the bigger picture, both like in your own company and in the world around. And like when I slid into NFL fantasy, like I said, the editorial slate was a little lighter. We weren't doing our own podcast. We had NFL Fantasy Live, which was great. But like I saw, because when I was starting to do it more, that was when I discovered like things like draft Twitter, and I was expanding more what I was reading and understanding about the industry. And I was like, man, there are people that are doing a lot of really great stuff out there. And our company isn't comparing right now, and it should be because we have the shield in our Twitter avatars and on our headshots and stuff, and this media group should have a better presence in the fantasy industry. So that was something that I kind of felt passionately about, having been there for a while and wanting it to be perceived better, because I know at times it wasn't perceived as well in the past because there weren't the resources behind it. So now that there were, and we could get a little buy-in, I wanted to just keep fighting for that and keep getting more resources to change the perception, because if my name's going to be attached to that, to that brand, and I work for it and defend it and stuff, I want it to be as good as possible. So that's kind of where that drive came from, to do more of the politicking and go to more of the meetings and like fight for more of that stuff for us and our group and things like that.
Well, I'm glad you do it. Because in the long run, it does help all of us. And you're right. I mean, I remember when I got the job, a few people said to me like, "Oh yeah, well, NFL fantasy, like it hasn't always been that good." And that's something that I feel the same way. I feel the same way about it. If my name is going to be attached to something, if I'm going to work for someplace, it's going to be damn good. I'm just glad that you do all the work there, and I sit around and do whatever the hell it is that I do.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to bring you in. Is like we finally got, because we had a bunch of guys that some were good, some didn't have the drive of like franchise before we got him in, and he's like grown by leaps and bounds and is kicking ass for us now. And Marcus and I were talking a lot when we were looking through resumes of guys. That's why we wanted to bring you in, because you had such a natural talent as a writer and a good voice and like a different perspective on things. And we were like, this is what we need to grow our team. And that's why we needed we had been there longer and we're inundated in all the, not nasty stuff, but like the corporateness of it all. We're like, we just need good, talented writers that we can set loose on the world. So that's why we brought you in. And I think people have responded to your stuff at work.
Check off, compliment me. All right, perfect. Good. Now we can end the podcast. No, I'm
I knew I had to get that in at some point. So
that is a requirement.
It is a
requirement for all. Absolutely. You have to compliment me at least once. Now, you can do it more than once. But at least once. But no, anyways, back to you, Alex. What do you think is one thing that you mentioned the big corporateness of it, and there's been a lot of things that have surprised me working for a corporate environment. What's one thing that you think you didn't really expect coming into that sort of atmosphere?
I think the thing that kind of caught me off guard, but now that I've been there, that I've seen it more, it's not that surprising, is despite the huge moneymaker and how popular fantasy is, like how little resources kind of sometimes get put into it. And we've gotten better about evening that out. But I mean, we have so many sponsored articles, and like the show, like our good friends of the producers, like Hype and Kalani, like his Friday show was basically every block was sponsored. Mm-hmm. So it like leaves him little opportunity for creativity. So despite how much money is brought into that, at first, like how little resources were put behind it, because it's just kind of like, well, it's fantasy and people are going to like it either way. So we don't need to put more resources or do other stuff with it, which I think is the battle we have sometimes too, because there is really good content we can put out, might not traffic as well as like, here are the 18 players you need to pick up for fantasy football this week. Like number 6 will blow your mind. But it's still good content, and it's important to the space and the people that play the game. So I think it's that battle of like the popularity and power of fantasy with how much actually gets put into it. And I will say, though, I think that we're starting to swing back around. I say that now. We'll see what happens once the season comes at our own company. But it could be encouraging because more people upstairs are starting to talk fantasy a lot more at NFL media. So that's good for us.
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, wow, this thing is really popular. Maybe we could maybe it could be great instead of it works. Yeah.
Maybe we could make fantasy great again.
Make fantasy great again. Oh, good God. I was joking on Slack before we got on here, like in my travels back east, I finally saw my first Trump sign. So
yep. I don't think I've seen one in Wisconsin yet, but one of my friends told me, because my parents recently moved into a condo that's on the water now, which my father, he's off today from the fire station, is already out in his boat and gone. But one of my friends drove past our old family home, and he was like, I'm pretty sure I saw a Trump sign in your yard, so way to ruin the neighborhood when you guys left.
Oh, terrific. There it is. Well, before we get any Trump supporters off the podcast, please listen.
Right.
Please don't turn the podcast off. I think it is funny that there's that like air of, well, yeah, fantasy works and we'll make it work. But there's so many good sites out there that are producing so much good content, so many good talented writers. I think it is important to always strive to be on top of that, and especially because this shield, like you said, is behind us and everything, and that presents some different challenges as well. But you mentioned like bringing your own sort of spin to NFL fantasy, like with the NFL film study or the fantasy film study and everything, and you do a lot of side work too that's not just fantasy. We'll talk about that later. But what do you think is something that makes your work unique, Alex, from mine or Marcus's or franchises or even people that are outside of our sphere as well?
I think it kind of just speaks to everybody. And I did a lot of writing throughout high school and college and stuff like that. So I kind of found my voice earlier. But it's having a voice and a perspective when you write, and whether it comes through in shorter form stuff or longer form stuff, like having a different way to look at things or just present your information in a clear, concise way. Like, I think a lot of people have always told me that when they would read my stuff, whether it was like a book report or like, something, they would be like, when I read that, I heard you saying it, which is, I think, what is important for every writer to find. And it's cool because like that was something evident with you right away, is you had a voice. And I think like the franchise, he kind of really found his voice this past year as he wrote more. And, like, guys like Rank, if you ever read anything that Adam Rank writes, you are 100% like, this is clearly Adam Rank. There's not a chance this is anybody else in the world. Like, if you took his headshot and name off of everything he ever wrote, you'd be like, yep, that's Rank, because of, 800-word tangents on Big Brother or whatever the hell he's watching nowadays. But so I think that was something I just kind of tried to find. And in terms of like the film study and doing different content, is because I came into sports writing a little later. I always knew it, knew the sport and the avenue well. And like at old jobs, I was the guy like you reading fantasy articles and film studies and things like that, on my breaks at work and stuff like that. So I've kind of always felt like I've been playing a little catch up, and I still am, because there's so many amazingly talented people like doing really good fantasy analysis out there. Yourself included, another compliment there. So we'll get that out of the way.
Sure.
But like, there are just so many people that do stuff that blows me away that I'm like, Jesus, like, I don't know how they had time to research that or think about that. And it just, it inspires me to try and look at things in a different way or think of more stuff when I have the time. So, but most importantly, it's having a voice and finding it. And it's not something that should be forced. It honestly just, as you know, it just comes with practice and comes with repetition and writing more and rewriting and kind of finding ways to express your thoughts in the best way. There's a quote, who was it from? I think it was Oscar Wilde, or somebody had a quote that when they were writing, they would always ask themselves, like when they'd be done with the passage, to say, was this the best possible way to express your thought? And then if it wasn't, they would go back and rewrite it. So just finding your voice. And it's not like you need to have the most crazy analytics or a reception perception or something like that. That will obviously help. But good writing and a good voice will speak for itself, and people will come back to that more often than not.
Yeah, who were we talking about this? We're talking about this in one of the episodes recently, and now I'm blanking on who it was. But how some of the you can have a great analytics study, but if you can't express it, if you can't write it well, nobody's actually going to really like it. And your data can be great, but if you're a bad writer, nobody will read it, and there's a lot of really interesting like analytic studies and data presented in articles, but when I'm reading it tends to lose me because the writing is bad, and then I don't really care what the data found, even if it's important. And I think that's something that, especially if you're going to go into analytics, like and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back too hard here, but if I was a crappy writer, people probably wouldn't care about reception perception as much, because it's like, oh, these are a bunch of numbers and this jackass can't explain to me what the hell it all means.
Right. Like, great, some colored spreadsheets and this weird stick figure, like, what the hell is this? But because you can contextualize it and explain the data in a clear way, that's helped people respond to it.
Certainly. And you mentioned like finding your voice and everything, and I will say, from obviously knowing you very well, as you mentioned, spending altogether too much time around each other, which hurt my feelings a little bit, by the way, but we'll talk about that.
No, I mean, it's good. We live and work together. So like, I stare, and our desks literally sit like this at the office. So I'm basically looking into your eyes all day. And
lucky
then
you.
Home, and I know, right? And then and then we do the same thing at the apartment. So
that's for sure. And I've mentioned, people have obviously being home have asked me like, well, how's your roommate and everything? I'm like, well, he's great. We're pretty bad influences on each other, because we both like to drink and bullshit. And there's a lot of drinking and a lot of I remember one time we got back from like our happy hour or whatever, and you're just like, do you just want to just drink and philosophize time? Like, that's all I've ever wanted to do.
Yeah, that was a good night. That was a good night.
That was a damn good night.
We don't do that every night, though. Thankfully, our livers would fall apart, which, speaking of being back in Wisconsin for like a week, and I still have a week forthcoming, I'm going to need to put my liver on a vacation when I come back to LA. I'll just say that.
You took a vacation, and now your liver needs to take a vacation after that. That makes
quick aside, like Wisconsin, everybody likes the beer and stuff, but the trouble is like it's great, but every day has been like a different event or like meeting other people.
Yeah.
And they always bring beer over, or they buy beer, and I'm like, guys, like, and yes, this is amazing, but like, please let's slow down just a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you. I already have a bunch of plans lined up for home, and I'm like, oh my God, all of these involve drinking. It's a struggle, but it's a struggle. I don't think anybody really actually thinks it's a struggle. But anyways, beyond this being the Backyard Drinking Podcast, I was mentioning earlier, that you're like, knowing you very well, and it definitely like editing everybody's work. I can tell that you definitely have a very man of the people sort of voice. You communicate things well in a way that everybody, like you mentioned, everybody can relate to, whether it's the, kind of what the fantasy footballers were saying in the last podcast. Like, it's good. It's in depth enough for the, veteran player, but not over the, beginner's head. And there's somewhere in the middle there. And I think you strike a very good, delicate balance that others might not. I'm sure I go over people's heads all the time, and there's probably fantasy writers that, keep things too basic for the, the veteran players. So there's definitely a balance, and I think you do a good job striking that. And one thing that I actually think is funny, and I'm actually just kind of putting this together in my head now. I know you mentioned you come from a different writing background a little bit. I come from a different writing background that's not sports writer. And, even franchise comes from a different, like the music writing background. I think one thing that's pretty unique about our team and all of us there, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. Normally I am, that there's definitely a different voice. Like we're not sports writers, I would say. We're like writers that are writing about sports, but none of us really writes like a sports writer, which I personally think is good because most sports writing, in my opinion, is bad. And that's something that I would encourage people that are aspiring writers is don't necessarily try to replicate your favorite sports writer, because most of it's probably not good writing, one, anyways, and two, like that's already out there. Try to be different. So kind of all that I just said, I didn't really ask you a question, but just react to what I just said.
No, I understand where you're going, and it's very true. Like we have a diverse set of voices and backgrounds in our group, which I think helps itself because, you get different point of views and different perspectives. And like the same thing, like you said, don't try and emulate your favorite sports writers. If you think about it, those guys, their voices all came from somewhere else too, or some sort of other background. It's not like they tapped into the sports writer voice well and then, siphoned out their portion of the same voice from it. Like all those best guys are the guys that whose writing stands out a little bit is because they had different experiences or they came from somewhere else or putting their own life into their work. So yeah. It's definitely important. I definitely think it's useful. And when it comes to preparing or reading or writing or other stuff like that, is definitely don't limit yourself to just sports. Like read everything. I mean, you've seen my bookshelf. Like I read comic books on the deck, and I've got novels, and I've got sports books and stuff like that too. And I read scripts still from working in entertainment. So don't pigeonhole yourself or wall yourself into this little sports world, because there's such great writing out there of all shapes and sizes that you can definitely learn from.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned scripts and writing on the side, and that's something that you do on a regular basis. You actually are working on different screenplays with one of your friends. Let's discuss that a little bit. One, why is I hate to say talk about, but hashtag talk about that. And two, why is that important to have kind of a side hustle, as we like to say?
Right. Well, for starters, when I was still in entertainment, I would write with my friend because it was a good creative way for us to stay out. And I was in development, which is where you work with writers and craft the stories and work with different properties and stuff like that. So it was a good way to still get in the mechanics of storytelling on the screen. And since getting out of entertainment, since that was kind of my first love and what brought me out here, I wanted to stay in touch with it a little bit. And it was a great way to stay in touch with my good friend Dane, who worked for Amazon in Seattle and will actually be moving to Venice shortly to work with Google. But it was a great way for us to stay in touch and just tap that creative side of the brain, because that's the field I came from first. And while I definitely work out that side of the brain too a lot at work, sometimes, as you know, during the season, that grind is not exactly as creative. It's like, here's my data, frame the argument, publish. So it's good to stay in touch with that. And it's just, like you said, it's a fun side hustle. It stays creative, and it's a different avenue if this were ever to not work out or to add on in addition to this, because we do have a manager for screenwriting, which is pretty exciting. And he's great. And we're working on ideas and stuff like that. But Hollywood is a crazy, tough, different business. So it's a slow roll, and it's a good one that we can just do on the side while he and I both have good jobs. And I think it is fun. I mean, it is a lot of extra work. I mean, usually when you come home, you just work on other football stuff, but it's fun for me to switch gears and turn my brain into that completely different creative fashion. And it helps me stay fresh and sane then especially from the grind of the season.
Yeah, I'm actually looking to get a project. It's not the same thing, but something like a side project or with writing started during the season too, just for that same reason. Cause I felt that, this being my first year working full time with football, like, it was definitely got to a point where I was like, God, I need to think about something else. Like, I can't just come home and think about more football. I'm going to drive myself insane.
So whatever it is, whether it's like if you're going to write a novel or write a sociology book or whatever. It's really good to be able to switch gears, because otherwise you get burnt out and you get in danger of then like keeping your brain thinking the same way too. Like if you're always everything you're looking at is the same way, if it's just football this way, football this way, like changing it, switching gears and thinking about something else can help you get a new perspective on football when you come back to it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that, like we were saying earlier, that perspective, whatever it was prior to writing about football was what made us, good by some standards football writers, and it ended up making us into the people we are today. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, like nobody likes the football robot, okay, now I will talk about football and that is it, this is a tweet about football and nothing else. And I've never no kidding, you follow my Twitter feed, I'm definitely not that guy. Sorry if you follow me, I always apologizing, but there's definitely a lot to but a lot that you need to work that brain out. Like you and I are kind of the same way, in that have a lot of other interests, and it's important to get that out there. And it's probably important for anybody that wants to do this, like I said, full time, because there's a chance that if you overindulge yourself, you just end up hating it, and that is possible. Yeah. People don't 100%. People don't think you can end up hating football or fantasy, but it can happen. That's
I haven't reached that point yet. There are definitely parts of the season where I'm like, I would like to think about something else, but I mean, I still love football. I've loved it my entire life, so I haven't reached the point yet. A lot of people asked me that when I got the job. They're like, "Oh man, are you gonna hate football?" And I was like, I loved movies, and working in movies didn't make me hate movies. Like, if it's something you're passionate about, you can be careful. But you're right, there is a line to toe, because if you get too inundated in it, then and you have nothing else, like that's how you get worn out.
Yeah, it's all about striking the balance with any job you have. You can't come home and think, because at the end of the day, it is a job, and you don't want to come home and always think about your job. You just have to. It's hard to get sick of football unless you make yourself sick of football, and that's where having other interests coming, coming along and all that. That's where that comes in. Alex, let's kind of take a grand view of the industry as a whole. And you mentioned when you came in to the sphere, that's when you started, realizing that there's things out there like, draft Twitter, and that there's more coverage going on than just, what's going on at NFL media and that sort of stuff. And I certainly came in from that swampy mess. It was pretty funny when I first got the job. A lot of people reached out to me and said, it's like, it feels like one of us, got out or whatever.
I've had followed a bunch of people on draft Twitter, and kind of slowly working my way into that community too. It was funny when we hired you, and I remember we were talking, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to announce it until this day or whatever. Like, yeah, that's fine, man. And when you put it out there, I was seeing all the people that were tweeting at you and stuff, and they were like, oh man, what a win for like draft Twitter and stuff. And one of them was going to the big leagues and stuff, or they were teasing you for like selling out. But
well, there's always somebody teasing me, which is fine. I welcome it and can take it. If you can't laugh at yourself, then what is this all really?
No, that's true, and that's when you've kind of assimilated into that culture on Twitter and stuff, is when you start getting made fun of as well. So
it's just like your friends. It's like your
exactly.
Friends. Yeah, I mean, I would say that my real friends across all specters, the people here, you guys back there, everybody likes to make fun of me. And I mean, I make myself a pretty easy target sometimes, but that's important. If you're if you're gonna be in this business too, you got to also learn to laugh at yourself and not take yourself so seriously. I think I said that on Twitter yesterday, actually. Like, the thing about taking yourself seriously is that it's almost never a good idea. You will almost always, it's almost never a good idea.
No, it's 100% true. And like in kind of a sidebar from that is just be open to like criticism and encouragement and stuff too, because whether it's from a good source like a coworker or something, or from Mr. Asshat on Twitter who's yelling at your article, egg avatars, getting up in arms about you saying something on Twitter is like having thick skin and taking criticism is a part of the game, and it's a good way to get better as well. As to, you don't want to take everything to heart, but sometimes there might be a kernel if you see some people saying something, or like, oh, what about this, or why don't you think about it this way? It's not an indictment of you as a writer. It's just in a process of your growth, and a good way to learn more.
Yeah, no, we're humans. We're always growing and maturing, and especially in writing, you should always be getting better. You should always be open to criticism, because it's never like there's never a cliff that you reach and you're like, all right, now I'm here. Now I'm a great writer. There's nowhere else to go. That is definitely a craft and a field that you are always improving. But kind of getting back, spinning a little bit to what I was originally going to ask you, like taking kind of a 30,000 of whatever. Oh, geez, that was a gross
30,000 foot view.
There it is. Okay, I'm not even going to edit that out. I'm going to leave that in there. 30,000 foot view of the industry and everything. What's something that, and not just our specific team, kind of take that out of it. Like, what's something that you see that you don't really like? I've kind of asked you this from people recently, and it provided some interesting answers.
That's a good question. I don't know that I have anything that's like really rubbed me the wrong way recently, because like for the most part, I feel like the community is quite inclusive and open to new ideas and stuff like that. And or maybe I'm just following the right people from the industry on Twitter and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer for something that I don't like about what's going on in the industry right now. Because I think it's cool and it's growing and there's a lot of new voices, and seeing places like, you know, Inside the Pylon isn't just strictly isn't like fantasy or anything, but seeing opportunities for a site like that to grow up and people be very supportive of it, and like Dynasty League football and stuff like that, and seeing, you know, so many people reaching out and stuff like that, I think is pretty cool. If there was one thing I wouldn't like, it would just be that there are too few like full-time opportunities for people to do this, and so many people that have such a good perspective and such a good voice have to like grind on as a second job to do this kind of thing. That's their passion. Like, I just wish, because there's, you know, there is so much money going around in fantasy. I mean, more of it's shifted at the top and stuff like that. But I guess there's something I didn't like, that there weren't more opportunities for those people to get more exposure and be able to do this kind of thing, you know, full time.
It's all focused at the top. That almost sounds like another economic structure I'm familiar with. Oh no! Now we're this is the second like political reference we've made on the podcast, which kind of makes
we'll hashtag stick to football over here for this podcast.
No kidding.
Or stick to writing or whatever you want to talk about. It is your show after all.
It is my damn show, and we will talk about whatever I want to talk about. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but no, I think that's a good point. And you know, that's something that I didn't really realize. It's funny that when I was first starting out, like finding out slowly and surely that like a lot of the writers that I followed and I thought were very intelligent and knew their stuff about football and had great writing chops and everything, weren't full-time writers and probably never, you know, would be. I mean, I obviously got lucky and ended up with a bigger gig and everything, but the opportunities are limited, and that is one of the themes of the podcast has been that, you know, you got to stick out in order to make yourself seen in what is a very, you know, robust space in terms of coverage and people that are talking about it and interest, but not robust in the terms of what you have to get paid to do it. It's a tough ride. It's a tough grind out there.
You know, off of that, I would say too, like. For people, like, don't be afraid to throw your hat in the ring for any sort of job. Like, I think you said too, when you first saw the NFL job, you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified or whatever, or like, they'll never pick me or whatever. But I tell that to people all the time. Like, I've had a friend's girlfriend was like trying to find work, and she's like, well, I'm not like, I don't meet the requirements for any of these jobs. I'm like, I don't think I've ever met the requirement fully for any job I've ever had. Like, you never know what it's going to be on your resume or cover letter or anything that's going to stick out to somebody. Like, you know, it doesn't hurt to shoot your shot when it comes to these opportunities. And while there are some that they're fewer and far between to get like the full-time gig, like if you want a chance at something, whether it's, you know, Dynasty League football or Bleacher Report or like Playmaker Mentality or something, like reach out to those people, apply for the job and just see. Like, I think I've told you this anecdote before, but I had a friend who, when she was moving out to LA to work in entertainment, she'd applied to work as a writer's assistant on a Shonda Rhimes show. Shonda does Grey's Anatomy, Scandal. It was Scandal at the time, so she got picked up on. But Shonda's a huge name, and my friend had like no writer's room experience, like some limited experience on the resume. She got the job because one of the people was like, "Oh, when I saw your resume, I saw that you worked as a PA for like a weekend on Transformers," and he was like, "If you can work with Michael Bay, you can work with anybody." So we brought you in. So like, she was super underqualified for that job, and when she came out, she had the best job like of us right away out of the gate. So you never know what it is going to be about you or what you've done that's going to catch somebody's eye or like, you know, make them pull your resume out of the pile.
Right.
Like for years, I remembered I saw Reception, like we followed each other and I was like, oh, right, Matt, he's a good writer. Like, let's pull him out.
Yeah, it is.
And, it was right.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's a nice thing I was going to say about you. And I say this a lot to people back here. There's a lot that I owe to you, and which is why I've been saying, I haven't been ignoring you. I've been saving your episode for the right time, because I know you.
I know.
There's a lot that I owe to you for having the job that I have now, and just successfully living in LA, because it can be a tough city to navigate. So much love, sending love your way through the interwebs.
No, I appreciate that. I'd say I helped you more on the LA front, like helping you find a good apartment when you had never been there, and like introducing you to more people and stuff. Okay. And on the writing front, like, people have said before, you did that on your own, and like other people will find that on their own. Like, yeah, I pulled your name out of the stack and, caped up for you. And when we were going through the different discussions, there were a lot of really good candidates. It wasn't an easy decision at the time either, but we were very happy with that one.
Yeah, well, somewhat happy, except for that one thing. But as we were saying earlier, there's, the worst thing that anybody can say is no, or nothing at all. I mean, that's what I figured would happen when I applied for the NFL job. Like, I'll probably never hear back from these jackasses, like, whatever. And then, but I did, and that's always the outcome that could happen. And the worst thing that can really happen is that, the job says no, and then you just take that as motivation and get better. If you apply to DLF or whatever, that you and they say no, then you just, all right, what do I need to do to get better? And you can ask that too if you hear back.
Yeah, absolutely.
No. Be like, what was it about my resume? And I remember, because there were sites that when I first started out that told me no. And said, no, we're not interested in you or whatever. And I would, normally just try to be like, okay, well, what is it about me or my writing, unless it's just an experience thing, like, what is it that I can do to get better? And hopefully next time swing around. So that's it's important to take criticism and, rejection very well, because that happens a lot.
And that what you were just saying too, is kind of leads me to another idea that we hadn't got on the topic yet, but I think that's kind of a good segue, is like, how important in any field, especially one that's like media driven, like fantasy writing, is how important networking is. Because like, whether it's on Twitter or in real life or via emails, like, don't be afraid like to ask people stuff, because pretty much everybody that you're going to ask got favors from somebody else along the way to get where they are. And networking it's a two-way street. You can ask them for something, then they might ask you for something later. And it's not even about like purely just asking and expecting something. It's just about building relationships and how important those are. And then I was naturally very good at that. I'm not going to lie. I've had other friends that I try to encourage to network more, like my friend Dane, who I mentioned, and he's like, I just suck at it. So it is an art and it takes practice, but I wrote a really good book in college for a class that was all about like getting prepared to work in entertainment. The book was called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And there was a fun anecdote off the top that the guy who wrote the book said. He was like, just got done golfing with some friends, and somebody I think asked, or maybe he proposed a question, like, if you had to call somebody in the middle of the night to come like help you out or whatever, he's like, how many people do you think would actually come and do it? Most people were like, maybe 3, like 4, 2. And the guy who wrote the book was like, I honestly think I have 50 people I could call, from building his network that deeply and like fostering those relationships, that would come and help him out in the middle of the night. So it's a good thing. And like you said, asking people for feedback, like if you get rejected for a job, or hitting us up on Twitter, like, how did you get where you are? Or could you read this thing? Or like advice, like it never hurts to ask and stuff like that, because a lot of people will be willing to give those favors and are going to be responsive to somebody being positive and asking something like that, or seeking advice or help like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I get a lot of people emailing me to ask for advice or to read an article. And I always say on the podcast is I will normally star things and be like, I'm going to come back to this eventually. I normally do not get back to people very quickly on emails.
I'm bad about it too.
Oh, it's so bad, which is why I think, well, that's why they make that flag or the star or whatever, so that I can remember it. Normally, like at the end of the week, I'll be like, okay, what was all this stuff I missed? It's staying in touch, not my best quality. On all my friends back home have reminded me of that.
And on the same token, like if you email like Matt, for instance, and he's like, yeah, I'll read this and get back to you, and doesn't for a while, doesn't mean he hates you or read it and dislikes it. Like, send a follow-up. Like,
right.
Lots of times it's just simply a matter of like the inbox getting flooded, or actually life getting in the fucking way because we're busy with work and things like that. So don't be afraid to follow, because I think too many people feel like there's that weird barrier when it comes to networking. It's like, I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to annoy them. But 9 times out of 10 or 99 out of 100, like you're not going to be a burden or annoying somebody. Like a reminder on something like that, or just reaching out is going to be fine.
Right, and most people are decent human beings. I mean, there are definitely some jackasses that are like, I can't be bothered to help a low-level writer. Like, there are people out there like that. Don't get me wrong. I would say that Alex is definitely not that person. I'm certainly not that person. And most of the people on the podcast that you've had so far, that you've listened to so far, are not that people. If you reach out to them, they will reply to you. They'll at least, and like Alex said, don't hesitate to do that follow. I know I'm the worst about that. When I was starting out, I was constantly like, God, I really don't want to annoy anybody. God, I really don't want to annoy anybody. But now that I'm kind of on that other end of the spectrum, I always find it weird that people think that they're annoying me. I'm like, well, no, dude. Like, so now it's, or that they're like, I know you're really busy and like, you write for a big website. I'm like, I'm just another person. I'm just another guy. Like, just another idiot. Like I say a lot. I'm just another idiot on his couch talking about football still, no matter what. So yeah, don't ever hesitate to feel like you're annoying someone, or don't ever hesitate to reach out and follow up. Yeah, I'm bad about following up. That's not what I'm good at. But hey, yeah. Here we are. Alex, kind of winding down here as we're getting close to the hour. Of course, really want to thank you for putting up with me even when you're finally rid of me. That is
we'll see if that ever does happen. We could end up just living in that apartment together forever on Fantasy Live and NFL.com. Just growing old, you, me, and Chuck.
Well, that sounds pretty good, considering both of our relationship histories. Maybe that's not a bad
maybe not.
Oh God! Now we're in a whole nother spectrum of the podcast. There's a lot of lanes where we had to stop right away. Alex, you mentioned that you staying interested in things outside of football is important, and obviously your work in entertainment and screenwriting and everything is a big part of that. What are some other ways that you kind of unplug from the football world?
I mean, like movies would be first and foremost. Like, I go to the theater all the time, like on Tuesdays with friends for the cheap night or walk down and things like that. That's one of my biggest passions is just going in the theater and having the lights turn off and just totally spacing out, like getting lost in that world. Like I like watching movies at home too, but there's just something about being in the theater and shutting off my cell phone and completely detaching. Like that's one of my favorites. And I love running too. I actually just got a new pair of running shoes, which is good. Because then you can get out there, and that's how I listen to podcasts a lot too. I know you have to listen to music when you work out, but it's just a good way to unplug and listen to different things. And then I've gotten back into gaming a little bit, as with my college friends back home. That's a good way too if you completely need to turn off the brain, man. Just hop online with some friends and kill some kids and some stupid game, or like play soccer or whatever like that. And it's a good way to unplug, but I think it is fun to stay diverse and up to date on other things, whether it's TV and movies or politics or literature or whatever. Like that's the trouble, is there's so many things I'd like to stay more up to date on. I just don't have the time. My stack of books that I still need to read is massive, and it's never going to go down. But just staying diverse and open, keeping your eyes and mind open to other ideas and other things and other avenues of entertainment that you might not have before.
Yeah, that's definitely super important. One question that I've found myself asking people a lot, and I don't remember which episode I started doing it. And maybe it's because I ask myself this question all the time and I have no idea what the answer is on my end. And I'm glad I get to be the one that asks the question. It's a typical thing that your grandmother might ask you after you graduate college, like, Alex, you've obviously come a really long way, as a person that's, you're like basically 30s, but you're still pretty young.
27 still, not basically 30 yet.
That's an inside joke, between the two of us, that, being that I'm obviously much younger and much, like I mentioned, much more attractive and fit and everything. Oh, sorry.
Here we go again. God, it's just like we're back in the apartment right now.
Oh, sorry. We're not talking about me. I forgot. Me and Captain America basically have the same body, just basically the same person.
Basically the same person.
But you've obviously come a really long way, in your career, you're a pretty young guy, and there's a lot of progress you made, and you should be proud of that. That's awesome. But what's your plan going forward? What's kind of the end game you see for your career?
End game is a good question. I don't know if I've figured out an end game yet, but for me, it's just like once I got into this spot where, you know, I'm creating content or creating whatever, like that's kind of what I always wanted to do. So I guess the end game is just get to a point where I can keep creating stuff and maybe get to a point where I can really create the things I want to create or tell the stories I want to create. And whether that's strictly in fantasy or entertainment or other writing or whatever, like, you know, I'm trying to work with our original content team to maybe do a long form this off season when I have a little more time off from fantasy once our draft kit is out. But just to continue to be creating and to continue learning and things like that, because being in the field as a writer, I saw another great quote one time. Somebody's like, is basically, I'm going to totally butcher this, but anybody who goes on to be a professional writer basically signs up to do homework for the rest of their life. Like, you know, it's like you're in high school, you always have to, or college or whatever, you always have to do homework and research things. And that's basically life as a writer. You can't just sit down ever and like, no novelist or anybody that's writing for a magazine ever just sits down and cranks out 5,000 words on nothing. You know, it takes time and it takes research, and it's a fun process because you're always continuing to learn and you're always experiencing new ideas and thoughts and things like that. And then hopefully in turn, learning how to convey your own new ideas and thoughts and stuff like that. So as long as I'm creating in some way, shape or form, I think that's stays that way till the end game. That'll be good enough for me.
Yeah, no doubt. And it is a good point. Like in our job in particular, and like you mentioned, any writer, but especially with football, like I think Josh Norris and I talked about this way back in episode 5, which feels like 100 years ago, you know, that you're never really off the clock. You know, there is always, and it's important to know obviously we talk about boundaries and know the line of that, but you're never off the clock. There is always more research you could do. There's always more tape you can watch. You know, there's more writing you can do. Like, there are hundreds and hundreds of players, and you could write about hundreds of different angles about every single one of them. But it's also, while it's important to know that know the line and boundaries and everything, you also have to realize, like, yeah, this is pretty much it's a commitment. You know, it's a lifetime.
Yeah.
It sounds like a marriage, but it's like a lifetime commitment.
And you have to find ways to find the joy in that still too, and find a way to stay excited and to stay hungry with all that, because like, I know one of my big homework assignments that I have for myself is my favorites right now, or likes, or whatever the hell they're called on Twitter these days. I have so many articles in there over the past like year or whatever that I've been like, oh, I really want to read this. Like I have them all tagged there, and I'm like, I need to really just like take a Sunday or something before the season starts and just have my favorites thing open and open up all the tabs of things I wanted to read and go through it. But that is still like exciting to me. It's things I want to do, but it's finding the time to do those. And like you said, finding that balance and boundaries is very important. But gotta also find a way to stay hungry and keep enjoying it. Whether that is taking breaks to play video games with college friends, or going to the theater, or going on a cross-country road trip and taking pictures of your dog the entire time. Like, you know, find ways to make sure that you still enjoy what you're doing, whatever it is. Doesn't particularly hold true to just fantasy writing. It's true of any walk of life.
100%. All right, so kind of seriously winding down here now. Alex, I always give the guest one last chance at the floor, you know, to kind of say anything you want, literally anything you want, as many things as you want. But, you know, especially like any advice to aspiring writers or just any final thoughts. The floor is yours now before I rip it out from under you.
Oh man, gonna rip it out from under me. It sounds so violent when really it's just a graceful exit to the podcast with your like sweet little like country twang music or whatever you typify that genre as in there. But I guess the advice I think I would have is for people to one, stay hungry and, you know, never be satisfied, because there's always something more to learn and always something more to do, whether it's in your own field or outside. And you don't want to get an ego about it, and always be aware that there are so many people that are smarter than you in a certain aspect or better than you. And two, part of that is like, be able to learn from the big picture and like understand the big picture. It's like before I got more in with NFL fantasy, you know, that was when I said it earlier on the podcast, like I was learning more about what else was going on in the industry and finding all these other sites and seeing the great work that guys like Evan Silva and Sigmund Bloom and Waldman and the guys at DLF and everywhere, you know, are doing both fantasy and otherwise, and figuring out a way to become a part of that and also be different, like you did with reception perception and things like that. And I think those kind of go in conjunction, is stay hungry and know what the big picture is to kind of find your place in it. So I think those would be my two closing arguments there. I don't know if that spirals you into any more questions or not, but that would be that. And network. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Absolutely. Sorry, I got a little laugh out of that. My mom apparently was watching this broadcast live and made several comments about the background that I was using. But no, I think those were great thoughts. And sorry, I got distracted. But no, you're absolutely right. It's important to stay hungry and also to find your place. You know, finding your niche, knowing your lane, I think is super important, and it's great stuff for, you know, aspiring writers and everything. No doubt about it. Great stuff from Alex Gelhar here. I really want to thank you, Alex, for, again, like I mentioned, putting up with me. Number one, when you did not have, when you are finally free from me, you know, it's definitely have a good time back in Wisconsin. Can't wait to see you again. I know you feel the same way. You don't have to say it.
A while though, man. We're gonna have to make a trip to the Gulf as soon as we're both back in LA or something. And
oh my God,
and not see other people for a while, because I'll be back in LA in like a week, but you're not coming back for like 2 or 3 more weeks on your cross country journey. So
yeah, a long time.
It'll be weird.
The drive back is going to be eventful, because I think I'm literally going to spend like 2 days just driving around Arizona, because there's just so many cool things to see there. I'm also going to spend a couple days in Austin with Sigmund Bloom, and Uncle Chaps might be coming down. And oh my God,
I'm going to be so jealous if you meet Chaps in person.
Well, you can be jealous, but we also might not survive. You never know.
That's true.
Sigmund's already said that we're going to have like a lawyer. Not him, a real lawyer present to sign waivers for everybody involved, and, you know, maybe do the thing where like NFL players probably should, where everybody turns in their cell phone beforehand.
Turn your cell phone in keys, and then you guys can go off in like a limo or something and have a wild night. But that should be fun. I'm jealous of your journey. I can't wait to hear more about it. It sounds awesome.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. But you know, Alex, like I said, thank you so much for coming on today. Thanks everybody for listening. The podcast response has obviously been great, and, you know, keep up with what we're doing in NFL fantasy. I can promise you, and not just because I'm there, but more so in spite of me being there, NFL fantasy is going to take this place over. We're doing a lot of great things, and there's only more to come. And it's because of talented people like Alex and all the rest of the people that we have there. So everybody, thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you learned something.